Hello everyone, Professor Wolf here. I'm making this video for students who are taking world religions with me at College of DuPage in spring 2024. This semester I have two sections of world religions, an honors face-to-face section and a non-honors net section. There are many differences between these two sections. However, I am choosing to use the same midterm exam for both sections this semester. The number of questions on this exam varies from semester to semester. I revised this exam with some regularity. This semester, it has 72 questions on it. In this video, I'm going to talk with you about the answers to many of these questions. I won't answer quite all of the questions in this video, but I will answer quite a few of them. Why would I do this? Well, if you're in the face-to-face section, the honors section with me this semester, you've heard me say this, but I'll say it again. I don't view these exams as an opportunity to test your capacity for memorizing facts about religion. Rather, I view them as yet another opportunity for us to sit down and talk about religion together, to grow in our understanding of religion, to expand our knowledge of religion. And so that's what we're going to do here. I'll be giving you many answers along the way. I'll talk to some of the questions, add some detail. I think you should learn a lot about religion as you're listening. Of course, if you ever have any questions about anything, you can ask me. What should you do about the questions whose answers I don't discuss? Well, there's a few ways you can get the answers to those questions. You can look at the textbooks. Also, you can use Google searches. I'm going to keep my eye on this as we work through the exam together, but my sense is that every question that I don't cover in this video, you could find the answer to through a short Google search. I will be checking this as we go along, making sure that's correct. And if there's any questions for which that is not true that I'm not going to answer, I'll give you some advice as where you could find the answer, but we're really looking at textbooks. Okay, let's get started. Question number 1. In which ancient land did the religion of Judaism first appear? I almost gave you the answer. I'm actually not going to answer that one. You look that one up. That should be really easy to get the answer to. Question number 2, according to the Old Testament, who are the first human beings? I'm not going to give you the answer to that one. It should be pretty easy. Work that out with the quick Google search. Okay, question number 3, things get a little bit more interesting here. According to the Old Testament, which of the following is not true of Abraham? Here are the options. A, he was the first patriarch of the Hebrews/Israelites. By the way, the term Hebrew and Israelite, when we're using Hebrew for a person, not a person group, not a language, right? The terms have the same meaning. Hebrews, Israelites, these terms basically have the same meaning in the Old Testament. Israeli, by the way, is different. Typically in English, we reserve Israeli for citizens of the modern state of Israel. Hebrew, Israelite, this is for the ancient people, okay? And of course, Hebrew is also a language. What do we mean here by patriarch? We mean the ancestor, like the founding father. So option number A, Abraham was the first patriarch, like the founding father of the Hebrews, of the Israelites. B, God promised to bless him and his wife with many children to make the nation of Israel from them. C, he mediated an important covenant with God. D, he was the father of Ishmael and Isaac. E, he built the temple. What's the right answer? E. E. A, B, C, and D are all true of Abraham, according to the Old Testament. However, the Old Testament says that it wasn't Abraham who built the temple. It was Solomon. It was Solomon. Just to add a little bit of a detail here. If you look at the books of Chronicles in the Old Testament, they emphasize that Solomon's father, David, helped lay the groundwork in a way for the temple. He helped with preparations and provisions, but it's Solomon who oversees the construction of the temple. In the books of Kings, you don't really see anything about David helping with preparations, provisions for the temple. In Chronicles, you do see David doing that, but who is it that is the proper constructor, the constructor properly speaking of the temple? Solomon. It's often called Solomon's temple. In Jewish tradition, there are 2 temples. Here we're talking about the first temple. All right. And you could look up all these details in a text or online. Just be careful with the sources you use, the sites you use online. All right. 4. According to the Old Testament, which of the following is true of Moses? A, he led the Israelites out of slavery from Egypt. B, he mediated an important covenant between the Hebrews, the Israelites, and God at Mount Sinai. C, he built the first temple. D, all of the above. Or E, only A and B. Well, we just talked about who built the first temple. Solomon. So we know it ain't Moses. So we know C ain't right. So we know it ain't all of the above. So we know it's, well, actually, do we know that it's both A and B? It is actually both A and B. Therefore, the right answer is E, only A and B. The answer to 4 is E, only A and B. Those things are both true of Moses, and they're importantly linked in the Old Testament. Israel is freed from slavery from Egypt. The Hebrews, the Israelites, are freed from slavery in Egypt under Moses and his brother Aaron, God inflicting these plagues on Egypt. Shortly after they're freed, they enter into an important covenant with God at Mount Sinai, and they start receiving commandments, right, as part of that covenant, often called the Mosaic or the Sinaitic covenant. We'll come back to those commandments in just a bit. Question number 5. According to the Old Testament, which of the following is not true of David? A, he was a great king who united the 12 tribes of Israel. B, he was a great poet. C, he helped Noah to build the ark. D, God made an important covenant with him and his descendants. E, he wanted to build the first temple for God. The answer is C. C. According to the Old Testament, he was a great king who united the 12 tribes of Israel for the first time, since the time of Moses, under himself from his capital of Jerusalem. We're told that. We're told he's a great poet. Many of the Psalms in the Bible are attributed to him. We're told that God made an important covenant with him and his ancestors, the Davidic covenant, promising David that his sons would rule over the people of God indefinitely, forever. And also, David wanted to build the first temple for God. In the books of Samuel, we're told that David wanted to build the first temple for God, but that God said, no, your son Solomon will build it. But again, when we look at the books of Chronicles, we see David does help with the preparations and the provision. So it's Solomon who's really, properly speaking, the builder, the constructor of the temple. Okay, what then is not true of David according to the Old Testament? He comes way after Noah. He didn't help Noah with anything. Noah was long gone by the time David arrived on the scene. 5, answer is C. 6, according to the Old Testament, which of the following is true of Solomon? A, he became king after the death of his father David. B, he was famous for his wisdom. C, he helped build the first temple. Or D, all of the above. Or E, only B and C. It's D, all of the above. All of the above. According to the Old Testament, he does all those things. 7, according to Jewish tradition, how many commandments or mitzvot are contained in the Torah? What do we mean here by Torah? We mean the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Christian Old Testament, or the first 5 books of the Jewish Bible. What are these books' names? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? I'll say those again. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. We call these books the books of Moses. According to tradition, Moses received these from God or wrote them down, or at least wrote down large parts of them. We call them the books of Moses because Moses shows up early on in the book of Exodus, and he's there all the way through to the end of Deuteronomy, dies and is buried by God at the end of Deuteronomy. We also call them the Torah, because Torah means instruction, teaching, instruction. We get a lot of teaching in these books. We get a lot of guidance in these books. One main form of that are the commandments, the mitzvot. The commandments, the mitzvot. And here in this context, what we're really talking about are the commandments, the mitzvot, that Israel receives from God through the mediation of Moses at Mount Sinai, is part of that Mosaic Sinaitic covenant after being freed from slavery in Egypt. The Israelites are freed from slavery in Egypt. Again, Moses and his brother Aaron, play a critical role in this. God inflicts these 10 plagues on Egypt, and then Pharaoh tells the Israelites to go. Then he changes his mind, chases them down. He and his army are drowned in the Red Sea, as we often translate it, though some scholars would take issue with that. Let's not worry about that right here. And then once Israel is freed, once the Israelites are freed, the Hebrews are freed, God appears to them at Mount Sinai and offers to make a covenant with them whereby they will become a special people. As part of this covenant, Israel, the Israelites, the Hebrews, are expected to follow the commandments of the covenant, the commandments, the mitzvot. Now, Christians will say, oh yeah, I know about that. There's 10 commandments. There's 10. Well, if we read Exodus 20, that is chapter 20 of the book of Exodus, in our modern translations, we typically will see 10 commandments laid out there. There's actually a little bit of an issue with that I'll come back to in a minute. But setting aside the issue with whether there are really 10 commandments in the book of Exodus in chapter 20, when we turn over to Exodus 21, we see more commandments. When we turn to Exodus 22, we see more commandments. When we turn to Exodus 23, we see more commandments. There's 40 chapters in total in the book of Exodus. They're not filled with nothing but commandments from 20 to 40. But if we look at the second half of the book of Exodus, 20 to 40, chapters 20 to 40, there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of commandments. Then we finish the book of Exodus. We turn to the book of Leviticus. We see 27 chapters. It's almost all commandments. It's not quite nothing but commandments, but it's almost nothing but commandments. Through the whole book of Leviticus, all we are told taking place at Mount Sinai, where God's giving these commandments to Israel as part of this covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the Sinaitic covenant. Mosaic for Moses, Sinaitic for Mount Sinai. Then we finish the book of Leviticus. We turn over to the book of Numbers, and wait for it, we get more commandments. I don't recall exactly when the Israelites, the Hebrews, finally depart from Mount Sinai in the book of Numbers. I think it's chapter 14. But they get commandments continuing into the book of Numbers. And even after they leave Sinai, they get more instruction from God. They get more guidance from God. And then in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses reviews all this law. He reviews all these commandments. He reviews all these mitzvot. This actually, Deuteronomy basically means like a second law, a repetition of the law, a rehashing of the law, a retelling of the law, a recounting of the law. They get the laws again, the mitzvot again. Moses dies and is buried by God. So we get a lot of commandments in these books. According to Jewish tradition, we get 613, not just 10, 613. And actually, I want to talk a little bit about the so-called 10 commandments. So if we read Exodus 20, what we see there is, actually what we don't see there, we don't see the phrase 10 commandments. The number 10 does not show up like that in Exodus 20. Jews, Christians, you ask, where do you find the 10 commandments? They'll say, well, look at Exodus 20. But when you look at Exodus 20, it never uses the phrase 10 commandments. And even the word commandment, the Hebrew word that is used here, many scholars would argue it's not actually commandment. It's more like saying or statement, right? And just to add a little more to this, Jews and different Christians have carved up the 10 commandments differently. And the way that Jews often understand this, and some Christians understand it, is the first commandment is God saying, I'm the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, the land of slavery. It's not a commandment. It's a statement, right? So just to actually complicate this a little further, if you read through Exodus 20, you can find more than 10 commandments. And there actually are Jewish traditions which say that there are more than 10 commandments. I think some say there are 13 commandments you can find in Exodus 20. We get the 10 commandments like a second time in Exodus 34. Just really quickly, Moses is up on the mountain receiving his commandments. He comes down at one point. He sees the Israelites led by his brother Aaron, he's going to be the first high priest, like worshiping this golden calf. Moses throws the tablets to the ground. The tablets break. The way a lot of scholars interpret this, it's not just that Moses is disappointed, even angry, but when he sees that the Israelites are worshiping the golden calf, even if this is supposed to be a symbol of God, which my scholars take it to be, it shows that the Israelites have broken the covenant. They've already broken the covenant, that Moses is maybe thinking the covenant's already over. It's already all over. God says, no, it's not over, Moses. Get ready. We're gonna do this again. And God says, get ready. And I think actually in Exodus 34, when you get the 10 Commandments the second time, I think Exodus 34, you can look this up. I think it actually does use the number 10 with this Hebrew word that could be, translated statement. We often, saying we often translate as commandment. But a really interesting thing is that in Exodus 34, you can easily find way more than 10 commandments. And also, if you compare the list of the 10 commandments in Exodus 34 to the list in Exodus 20, it don't exactly match up. So it's actually really quite interesting. Give you a little bit of background on some of the stuff. It's fun. All right. There's a lot of different ways you can think about all this too. There's different ways to make sense of all that. If you want to talk to me about it, I'm happy to do it. All right, let's move on. Question number 8. According to the Old Testament, where did the Exodus begin and who led it? I'm going to let you work that out. You should be able to do that pretty easily. Textbook, Google search. Question number 9, who destroyed the first temple? Who destroyed the second? You should be able to work this out pretty easily, but I'll go ahead and give you the answer. That first temple, the Temple of Solomon, was destroyed by the Neo-Babylonians. And then the second one was destroyed by the Romans. I believe the first temple was destroyed about the year 587, 586 BCE, almost 600 years before Jesus. The second one is destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 CE, about 40 years after the death of Jesus. And those are actually very, very important events in the Bible. Okay. Actually, I should just clarify, you don't actually see the second temple being destroyed in the New Testament, but there are prophecies about it there are prophecies that are often taken to be prophecies about that temple being destroyed. And a lot of scholars think you can see, hints as to the destruction of the temple in books of the New Testament that were written after it was destroyed. All right, let's move on. Question 10. In what language or languages is the Old Testament written in? Actually, it's just, so A is only, you could work this out too, but it might be a little bit tricky, so I'll help you out here. A is only Hebrew, B is Hebrew and Aramaic, C only Greek, D Greek and Aramaic, E only Arabic. The answer is B, Hebrew and Aramaic. The Old Testament is mostly written in Hebrew, but there's a little bit of Aramaic in it. You see that, for example, in the book of Daniel, but there's you can find a bit of Aramaic outside of Daniel as well. Look at Ezra. And there's a little bit more Aramaic there. So, question number 11. According to Jewish law, when does the Sabbath begin and end? I'll just help you out with this. B, begins on Friday night and ends on Saturday night. 12, what is Havdalah? C, it's a series of rituals that signals the end of the Sabbath. 13, which of the following is not a major holiday in Judaism? I'm going to let you work that one out. Just plug the names into Google or look them up in our Judaism textbook. You should be able to work out the answer to that. 14, who are the Pharisees? So this was a question on one of the reading quizzes on our Judaism textbook, but I'll talk through the answer with you here. Who are the Pharisees? A, Jews who affirmed the existence of life after death. B, Jews who accepted the oral Torah. C, Jews who accepted the written Torah, the Old Testament. D, it's all of the above. It's all of the above. They did believe in life after death. They did accept the Old Testament, or at least the portions of it that were oh man, this is actually really tricky. Because again, a lot of scholars would say the Old Testament as we know it today, it's not fully canonized, at least during the early part of the period in which the Pharisees live, right? There were Pharisees who lived to see the whole Old Testament canonized as we know it, but not, at the beginning it wasn't all there like we know of it. But a lot of those writings were there. A lot of them, well, they're all there, and they're known. And the Pharisees, even at the early, part of this period, yeah, like I don't want to get too into the weeds on this, because actually even it's a little bit tricky with saying that all the parts of the Old Testament are there. Let's just do. I got to pick and choose here what we're going to get into. Here, who are the Pharisees? A, B, and C. They're all true. Just say D, all of the above. Okay. The important thing here is they accept those written scriptures. All Jews are going to, right? They also do recognize the authority of these oral traditions, and they do believe in life after death. Let's move on to question number 15. Who are the Sadducees? A, Jews who denied the existence of life after death. B, Jews who rejected the Old Testament. B, Jews who rejected the oral Torah. C, Jews who rejected the written Torah, the Old Testament. D, all of the above. The answer is E, only A and B. Only A and B. The Sadducees did deny the existence of life after death. They just thought it basically wasn't there in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is, they knew it, the Old Testament, as they read it. I could talk about that a little more in a moment. They also rejected these oral traditions that the Pharisees accept. But they do accept the Old Testament. Again, it is a bit tricky, because it kind of depends on what. Again, the whole Old Testament, as we know it today, a lot of scholars would argue isn't really canonized until a bit after the death of Jesus. Well, there are Pharisees and Sadducees before that. So it's a little bit misleading in a way to even talk then about these folks, all of them like accepting the Old Testament, but but we could say this: they all accepted a lot of the books that end up in the Old Testament. They all accepted a lot of books in the Old Testament, right? Again, it might even be a little bit tricky here to even refer to all the books of the Old Testament existing at the time that the Pharisees and the Sadducees first appeared. I would actually need to look up. I would need to go and double check. When do historians think that the Pharisees and the Sadducees first appeared? Believe it or not, a lot of scholars believe that there's some parts of the Old Testament, and I'm really thinking here primarily of the second half of the book of Daniel, that were finished less than 200 years before the birth of Jesus. So I don't know, were the Pharisees and the Sadducees kind of up and running by then? I'd have to actually go and check that out. I don't really recall exactly when scholars see the Pharisees and the Sadducees first appearing on the plane of history, but it might be about that time. So it's actually a little bit interesting. Was every book that eventually made it into the Jewish Bible the Christian Old Testament? Were those books even really all written, right? As we know them today, by the time that the Pharisees and the Sadducees are kind of up and running. Whew, it's a lot. Stuff gets complicated. But we can, setting aside all those complications, we can put it like this. The Sadducees and the Pharisees are two of several ancient groups of Jews. They start at least a bit before the time of Jesus. They accept the Old Testament. They both accept the Old Testament, putting that in scare quotes. They accept the Old Testament. They accept those texts. They certainly accept the books of Moses, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They accept all that. They accept a lot else besides. We'll just say they accept the Old Testament. But the Pharisees also put trust in these oral traditions that the Sadducees do not. And connected with this, there are certain beliefs that the Pharisees have that we see show up in later Judaism, and we see show up in Christianity, some of them, that the Sadducees don't have. And one of these is belief in life after death, because I'm not going to go over this in this video really in any detail. But if you read through the whole Old Testament really, really carefully, and translation can kind of obscure this a bit because sometimes we translate these things a little bit loosely. But it's just, you don't really see any real reference to a robust afterlife through a lot of the Old Testament. You don't see it in a lot of the Old Testament. We seem to get glimpses of it, for example, in the end of the book of Daniel and in a few other parts of the Old Testament, but these parts of the Old Testament seem to be written a bit late. And it's, the Sadducees just might not have accepted all those texts, or there might have been some disputes about how they were to be interpreted. Boy, that was a bit complicated doing 14 and 15. Let's move on and try to keep something simple for a little bit here. 6, it is, I think, really important to appreciate, though. There is a real important lesson here. It's actually very difficult to summarize even basic facts about a lot of this stuff. And the way that we often do this is it's often actually imprecise and misleading in ways that are not always good, right? It can be really tricky in religion. This whole distinction between like the facts and the theory, it ain't always so clear. And a lot of times the quote unquote basic facts are not always quite clear as we think they are. And even when they're fairly clear, it can be really complicated to express them without committing mistakes along the way. All right. 16. What are the names of the 2 Talmuds? C, Babylonian, Palestinian. 17. The Talmuds consist of 2 texts, one of which serves as a commentary on the other. What are the names of the 2? A, Mishnah, Gemara. 18. True or false? The Talmuds are important works of rabbinic Judaism. Absolutely true. 19. The 2 Talmuds were both completed centuries after the death of Jesus. True. The Mishnah, the earlier part of the Talmud, is completed about the year 220 CE, which is, almost 200 years after the death of Jesus. And then the Gemaras, the commentaries, are completed even later. Now, again, the dominant form of Judaism in the world today is Rabbinic Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism is centered in these rabbinic texts, including the Talmud, not just the Talmud, but also the Talmuds. As our textbook on Judaism put it, it's written by a Jewish scholar of Judaism. In some sense, Judaism is younger than Christianity. In some sense, it's older. Of course, it's older. Judaism is rooted in the Old Testament. That's all done before Jesus. But it's also rooted in these rabbinic texts like the Talmud that were completed after Jesus, even if they're developing out of oral traditions from before the time of Jesus. Rabbinic Judaism, is it older than Christianity or younger? It's kind of both, right? Again, this stuff is really complicated. We just want to say, historically, it goes Judaism, Christianity, Islam. That statement right there seems so obvious. What could be more obvious? It's actually kind of misleading in a number of ways. We'll build on this a little bit when we get to Islam. Okay, question number 21. I'm just going to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to read through all that. I'll just say it's true. 22. English and Yiddish are both Germanic languages. True. Look up Yiddish. Yiddish is a language used by many Central Eastern European Jews. So it's a Germanic language like English. Okay? Yiddish is a great language. Lots of good insults in Yiddish, but it's just a great language overall. 23. Christianity. We're into Christianity now. Approximately how many years ago did Jesus live? B, 2,000 years. That's why we're in 2024. Question number 24. In what religion was Jesus born? What religion did he practice as an adult? Judaism. Some may want to contest this. They may want to say, okay, I grant that Jesus was born a Jew, but does he really practice it as an adult? Sure seems like it. I mean, he goes to the synagogue, he reads the scrolls, he's participating in Passover. Seems like he's practicing it. I don't have any question here about what he was doing after the resurrection. That's maybe, we can set that aside. 25. What was the name of Jesus's mother? According to Christian tradition, what is the name of the angel who appeared to her and informed her she had conceived or was going to conceive this Christ child as a virgin? B. Mary is his mother. The angel's Gabriel. 26, what are the names of Jesus' three main apostles from the perspective of the Gospels? Peter, James, and John. A. 27, what are the names of the four Gospels contained in the New Testament? You could work that out. 20, on your own, quick Google search or textbook of Christianity. Question number 28, true or false, Paul contributed more books to the New Testament than any other author? Absolutely true. A lot of scholars argue that Paul did not, in fact, himself write all the letters of the New Testament that have his name attached to them, but basically all scholars agree he wrote at least 7 of those letters. They're letters, and some are quite short, but we treat them as like books of the Bible. They're books of the Bible. However you slice it, Paul definitely contributed more books to the New Testament than any other author. I'm not talking about raw number of words or pages, but books, yeah, Paul for sure. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think all scholars would agree with that, no matter what they believe or don't believe. Question number 29. Actually, let's really quickly, let's run through the books, by the way. The books that are totally, the letters that are totally undisputed. We got Romans, we got 1st, 2nd Corinthians, we have Galatians, we have Philippians, we have 1st Thessalonians, which is generally thought to be the first one, and we have Philemon. Those would be the 7 undisputed letters. All right. 29. What language is the New Testament written in? Language or languages? It's D, Greek and Aramaic. It's almost all in Greek, but there's a little bit of Aramaic. Jesus spoke Aramaic, and sometimes the Gospels report Jesus's Aramaic speech, not in a Greek translation, just in the Aramaic. It's Greek with just a smattering of Aramaic. Again, there's some Aramaic in the Old Testament as well. There's more Aramaic in the Old than the New, but there's actually 3 languages the Bible's written in: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Question number 30, true or false? All the books of the New Testament were written within roughly 100 years of the death of Jesus? True. All scholars agree on this. Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, atheist, you name it. All scholars agree. Basically, we all agree that the New Testament's completely written about 75 years of the death of Jesus. Question number 31, what is the doctrine of the Trinity? Give the most precise answer. It's D. If you just say Father, Son, Holy Spirit all exist, that's not the Trinity. If you say there are 3 different forms or manifestations of God, that's definitely not the Trinity. If you say that there are 3 different divine persons, that's part of it. But really for the Trinity, there are 3 different divine persons, but they're all one God, right? If you don't have they're all one God, they could be 3 separate gods, or maybe only one of them is God, right? If you say 3 different divine persons, you got to link them all together. And you can't just say they exist. You got to say they're different divine persons that are also one God. That's a Trinity. 32. That's how it's defined, right? The truth of all this stuff, obviously, that's a different matter. You all got to work all that out on yourselves. All right, 32. What do Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox Christians, and most but not all Protestants teach about Jesus? A, that he was fully God and fully man. If you've been in my face-to-face class, you may have heard me say before, I do sometimes have Christians say to me, no, we don't believe that Jesus is God. We believe he's the Son of God. Well, it depends what type of Christian you are. But what Catholics teach and what Eastern Orthodox Christians teach and some non-Eastern Orthodox teach and most but not all Protestants teach is that Jesus is the Son of God and God the Son. It's a both and. It's not an either or. But not all agree with that. Jehovah's Witnesses don't agree with that. The largest group of Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, doesn't agree with that. There's some other Protestant groups that don't agree with it. Right. 33. What event from the New Testament does the Christian holiday at Christmas commemorate? Okay, you can do that on your own. 34, Easter, do that on your own. 35, Pentecost, do that on your own. 36, which of the following is not regarded as one of the church fathers by Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox Christians? E, Akiva, he was a great rabbi, one of the heroes of the Torah, hero of the Talmud. 37, Christianity. All right, we're still in Christianity. What is at least one important difference between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism? Actually, we got 2. We have B and C. There's a lot of similarities between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. There's also some differences. I was actually hoping to make a video about that this semester. We'll see if I get around to it. But for now, let's just stick with this B and C. So Eastern Orthodox Christians and Catholics, they do believe that they do believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. They do believe that when you take the wine and the bread, you are actually consuming the real body and blood of Jesus. We could go into some more detail about the way that Orthodox and Catholics think about this, and there are a couple differences on this, but they both agree with that. Some Protestants agree with that. There are some Protestants agree with that, right? One thing I would say the Catholic Church has been clear on for a couple hundred years now is that once the transformation is complete, there's no longer bread or wine. There's no longer the substance of bread or wine. It appears as if there's bread and wine. It appears as if there's bread and wine, but there's actually not bread and wine. It's only the body and blood of Jesus. Many Orthodox would say this as well, though there's a little bit of a complication there. Many Protestants who believe in the real presence, they would say it's like both the bread and the wine and the body and blood of Jesus, the real body and blood of Jesus. But Luther, the architect of the Protestant Reformation, he believed in the real presence. He took that awfully seriously. Right? And I want to really get into the details of this, of like Luther's own views on exactly how that worked out. Actually, a lot of scholars say that he refused specific working out of that. But let's not get any more details. Let's just say the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics, they both affirm the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. When you're taking the bread, the wine, you're actually taking in the real body and blood of Jesus, right? Some Protestants agree with that. Most don't. But the Catholics and the Orthodox are in agreement on that. And the Roman Catholic Church, or really just the Roman Catholic Church, priests cannot marry. They cannot marry, right? If you're like a Lutheran minister and you're married and then you convert to Catholicism, you can become a Catholic priest and still keep your wife. But if you're a Catholic priest, you can't get married. You can't get married, right? And there's very, very few married priests in the Roman Catholic Church, almost none. A lot of Catholics aren't even aware that they exist, right? Let's say in general, Roman Catholic priests, you can't marry. Eastern Orthodox priests, you can marry. At least before you become a priest, you can marry. Most Orthodox priests are married, not all, but most. So there is a difference there in B. And C, Eastern Orthodox Christians have no pope. There are some Orthodox Christians that don't fall under the fold of the Eastern Orthodox. There are other types of Orthodox that will refer to the head of their church as a pope, but the Eastern Orthodox Christians have no pope. The Catholics do have a pope. Again, there's a lot more we could say about this, but let's just move on in the interest of time. 37, the answer is D. It's B and C. And that doesn't even begin to capture the differences between Orthodox and Catholic. And again, there's so many similarities, but for our purpose, we're just going to move on. All right, 38B. 38 is B. Who initiated the Protestant Reformation and when? Martin Luther. B. You should read about him. Read about that. It's very, very important. Our textbook went into some detail about it. Protestant Reformation is one of the most influential movements in modern history. All right, 39. And I mean, critical for Christianity, but just for the world in general, really, in all sorts of ways. Question number 39. Which of the following was not a complaint that early Protestants made against the Roman Catholic Church? A, that it sold indulgences. No, they did not like that. They're very critical of that. B, that they discouraged translation of the Bible into vernacular European languages such as English and German. No, by and large, Protestants are really not happy about that. From the beginning, C, Roman Catholic Church venerated Mary and the saints. By and large, Protestants not happy about that. D, they believe baptism and the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, are sacraments. The Protestants accept some of the sacraments. The Roman Catholic Church has 7 official sacraments, has 7. Protestants do not reject all of those. They do not reject all of those. They retain 2 of them. Pretty much every Protestant group I've ever heard of has at least 2 sacraments. Baptism and the Lord's Supper. I've seen some scholars say that Luther did actually regard confession as a 3rd sacrament, at least at some part of his career. I have not been able to verify that. I've not been able to really dig into that, but I have seen some scholars say it. It does seem that at least for part of his career as a Protestant, Luther did place a very great emphasis on the importance of repentance. but he may not have regarded it as a sacrament throughout his whole career. And as a Protestant, and I'm not sure yet he really did for any. I still got to look that up. Let's talk a little bit about what a sacrament is and what it means to reject something as a sacrament, and let's add a little more detail to baptism and the Lord's Supper. Sacraments are understood in different ways by different Protestant groups. By the way, one big kind of bone of contention between Catholics and Protestants, but also between different types of Protestants, concern not just the number of the sacraments, but the nature of the sacraments. What are sacraments? So different Protestant groups disagreed with one another. Different Protestants disagreed with other Protestants pretty sharply on this question of just the fundamental question of like, what is a sacrament? And they often disagreed with the Catholic Church about the nature of the sacrament. And then there are also corresponding debates about the number of the sacraments. There's also been, there's also some divergence here between the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox. So I'm just going to leave the Orthodox out of this and focus on the Catholics and the Protestants. Like, one way we can start to get an understanding of the sacraments for the Catholics is that they involve some kind of material or physical, reality or action. So at baptism in the Catholic Church, you're doing it with babies. I mean, if you become Catholic and you're old, actually, really interestingly, if you become Catholic and as an adult, do you have to get baptized again? No. The Catholics would typically say that if you were baptized in a Protestant church or an Orthodox church, we accept the validity of that baptism. Typically, you will not get rebaptized. But if you've never been baptized, then you're going to have to get baptized, right? And that can be done in different ways when you're an adult. And the Catholic Church, typically, you come into the Catholic Church as a baby. You get baptized as a baby, typically. You get, like, dunked in water, right? And you get some water sprinkled on you, right? Right, this is, actually, I should be careful about that. I haven't seen a Catholic baptism in a long time. I mean, I had one, but that was 46 years ago. I don't really remember any of that. I should actually be careful with this. In the Orthodox Church, definitely, you're getting fully immersed, fully dipped, right? I actually don't remember. I haven't seen a Catholic one in so long. I think you kind of get dipped / dunked and maybe also sprinkled, right? That's a good question. You look that up. But anyhow, water, there's something material there. There's something physical there. And there's like physical action of dipping, dunking, sprinkling, right? With the Lord's Supper, there's the bread and the wine, or at least the former bread and the wine, the appearance of the bread and the wine, right? With confirmation in the Catholic Church or chrismation in the Orthodox Church, oil is rubbed on your head. Oil is rubbed on your head. So what you have here is you have like physical realities. Also, anointing of the sick. Anointing of the sick is rubbing of oil, right? So you got water, bread wine, or the appearance of bread wine, remnants of bread wine. You have oil. You have these like physical realities, right? Also, priests get anointed, right? Holy orders is another Catholic sacrament. Coming into the church as a priest, also you receive oil. So there's a physical reality here, But the idea is that the physical reality, the physicality of it is important. The physicality is important, right? The Catholic Church, the physicality is important. The matter matters, right? It's a key part of like Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox sacramentology. Matter matters. So the matter matters. The physical aspect element matters, but it's not just that. It's also pointing to a spiritual reality and even mediating that spiritual reality. And through this participation through this exemplification, this mediation of the spiritual reality, the participant in the sacrament, at least potentially, receives grace, receives blessings like strengthened faith, strengthened hope, strengthened love, right? Like greater self-awareness of sin and growth in resisting sin, healing, spiritual healing, right? All of this, right? So the idea is that the sacraments are mediating these kinds of realities. Also, baptism is a rite of initiation, of coming into the church. And several of these sacraments actually have this initiatory function as well for Catholics and for Orthodox. It's not just, with penance sacrament in the Catholic Church, you're receiving forgiveness of sins. from Jesus Christ, right? The priest is a witness to that. It's not you're getting forgiven by Jesus, but the priest is a witness to it. But in that sacrament, you're receiving forgiveness for sins. And all these sacraments, you could be receiving faith, strength in faith, hope, love, you name it. But also for baptism and some of these other sacraments, it's an initiation. It's a coming into the church. It's a coming into the church, right? Okay. So let me say a little more to that. When the Protestants are some of the Protestants will be pretty close actually to the Catholics on this basic conception of what a sacrament is. Some are further apart. Some they want to downplay the physicality of it and treat it more as a symbol, right? And they might not agree that matter matters quite in the way that the Catholics think it does. There's a lot more that can be said on this. It's really an extraordinarily complicated part of Christianity, but it's actually a very, very important part to understand Christianity, to understand the sacraments and how they work. That's about all I want to say about that, though. Here, in the interest of time, I got to move on a little bit. A few things to just wrap up with before I move on from sacraments. When the Protestants said that we won't recognize all the Catholic sacraments as sacraments, that didn't mean that they're saying that what the Catholics identified as sacraments were wrong. Like one of the sacraments in the Catholic Church is marriage. Well, it wasn't that the Protestants said marriage is bad, we shouldn't have marriage. They weren't saying anything of the kind. They were just saying that we don't see precedent in Scripture for regarding it as a sacrament in the sense we would understand sacrament and in the sense in which we would understand baptism and the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, the bread and the wine, that is to be sacraments. So let's clarify that. 2, Protestants often disagreed with, again, the Catholics, not just on the underlying theory of the sacrament, but also how to perform these. So infant baptism is a really great example for us to take here, right? So every Protestant group I've ever heard of, they recognize baptism as a sacrament. Do they all baptize babies? No. Do some? Yeah. Do others, reject that? Yeah. Catholics baptize babies. Some Protestants baptize babies. Some Protestants don't baptize babies, right? So we're seeing here you can get layers of agreement and disagreement. You can have agreement and disagreement over the underlying theory of the sacraments, a number of the sacraments, and then for a sacrament that's agreed to be a sacrament by both Catholics and Protestants, the performance of the sacrament, which is also tied to the understanding of that particular sacrament and often back to sacraments in general. Whew. Let's move on. 39 was D, my friends. All right, let's move on. 40. Who founded the Church of England? E. Henry VIII. 41. Which of the following are all denominations of Protestantism? I want you to work that one out on your own. You could just punch all the names into Google, and that should help you out. 42. Which of the following individuals is traditionally regarded as the founder of Mormonism, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Where was this individual born? I'm going to let you figure that out. All right, we're on to Islam. 43. Roughly how long ago did the Prophet Muhammad live? C, 1400 years ago. According to Islamic tradition, he's born in the year 570 and he dies in the year 632, 1400 years ago. 44. Where did the Prophet Muhammad spend most of his life? We would say D, present-day Saudi Arabia. Present-day Saudi Arabia. Again, there was no Saudi Arabia back then, but present-day Saudi Arabia. Right. There are some traditions about the Prophet perhaps actually having left that area on merchant caravans. Let's not worry about that. 45. Where is the Prophet Muhammad buried? Medina. Medina is about 250 miles north, 400 kilometers north of Mecca, in the western part of the Arabian Peninsula. 46. How many surahs, in English we sometimes call them chapters, are found in the Quran? 114. 114, so a bit over 6,000 verses, but it's 114 chapters. 47, according to Islamic tradition, where did God reveal the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad? It's Mecca and Medina. It's both. It's Mecca and Medina. Where does God reveal the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad? In Mecca and in Medina. It's not Damascus, not anywhere else. Mecca and Medina, it's E, only A and B. 48. Next to the Quran, what is the most important source of Islamic law for Sunnis? The Hadith. Okay. 49. Who are the two most important Hadith collectors in the Sunni tradition? Bukhari and Muslim. These are abbreviations of their names. Bukhari dies in 870. Muslim dies in 875. The Prophet Muhammad dies in 632. So we're looking at about, they die about 250 years after the Prophet Muhammad. Both men, they're not the first to collect hadith, and they're not the last, but Sunni tradition regards them as the greatest. Actually, in Sunni tradition, it's common to distinguish six books as, being most important. And of those six, Bukhari and Muslim are, they're the best. They're often regarded as the best. Okay, let me move down. So, question number 50. What language is the Quran written in? E, only Arabic. Again, I mentioned this in my face-to-face class, my honors class. There's actually some dispute about this in a sense. Even within Islam, some early commentators on the Quran, some early Muslim commentators on the Quran argued that some of the words in the Quran originally came from other languages, right? So an example I often mention is, and to this day, there are some scholars, Muslim and non-Muslim both, that would argue that the term Injil, gospel, is actually originally an Ethiopian word. There's debates on this. Another thing we got to keep in mind, though, just because a word originates in another language doesn't necessarily mean it's not a word of your language. So I'm just going to use a kind of, example. It might seem a bit silly, but the word pizza, originally that's an Italian word. That doesn't mean it's not an English word, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well. But just really briefly on it. But if you're really interested in this issue of foreign words in the Quran, I have a number of articles on it. I'd be happy to send them to you. It's a really, really interesting topic. And again, this is an issue that's been discussed and debated in Islam itself since, about the beginning of Islam. 51. What are the four main schools of classical Sunni law? I'm going to let you look that up. No, actually, I'll give you that one. It's B, the Hanafi, Hanbali, Maliki, and the Shafi. B. 51 is B. 52, what are the 5 pillars of Islam? I'm going to let you look that up. Let me give you a hint, though. Well, it might be a little bit tricky. Question number 53, how many times per day are Muslims required to perform prayer, salat, the obligatory prayers? You should be able to find that out on your own. I'm going to leave that to you. 54, what are the names of the 2 ritual washings that Muslims perform to remove internal sources of ritual impurity? B, wudu and ghusl. Okay, you can probably figure that out on your own, but I give it to you. 55, what are Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha? I'm going to let you work that out. You should be able to do that with a quick Google search. 56, where is the earthly Kaaba located? I'm going to let you do that. You've done the Inside Mecca paper by this point. You definitely should know the answer. I just gave it to you, the Mecca. Yeah. All right, 57. Which of the following are all sector divisions within Islam today? I'm going to let you do that. You should be able to do that. 58. Actually, I realize I haven't talked about this in my face-to-face class yet. Roughly what percentage of Muslims around the world today are Sunni? What percentage are Shi'i? Let's actually chat about this for a second. It's really interesting. It's really important. So the answer is D. The answer is D. Just really simply put, we don't have totally precise figures for this. It's really hard to get those, doing censuses, really of any size anywhere. But the answer is D. If we look at Muslims worldwide, Sunnis are about 80 to 85%. Shi'is are about 10 to 15%. One thing I can add to this, there are different types of Shi'i. The largest group of Shi'i are the so-called 12er Shi'is or Imami Shi'is. They go by a few different names. That is the largest group of Shia, the dominant form of Shiism today. You have many, many, many 12er Shias in Iran. You have many, many, many in Iraq, right? You have in other parts of the Middle East and the Muslim world. But I just want to let you know, Sunnis, there are no formal divisions within Sunnis. I mean, there's the schools of law, but they're all fully Sunni. I mean, that's not a division like Lutheran Baptist, right? It's not a division like the divisions within Shiism. Really, Sunnis are all, they're unified. I'm not saying they never disagree on anything, but there's no formal divisions within Shiism in the sense that we mean now. There's no formal divisions within Shiism. There's no formal divisions within Sunnism. There's no formal divisions within Sunni Islam. There are formal divisions within Shiism. The largest group are the 12ers, but there are others. The Ismailis, the Zaydis, and others, right? Are all Muslims either Sunni or some type of Shia? No. But almost all are either Sunni or Shia, right? And by the way, Sunni, this name Sunni is often traced back to the word Sunnah, the tradition of the Prophet, the precedent of the Prophet Muhammad, right? Today, again, the most important source for that Sunnah, that tradition of the Prophet, the precedent of the Prophet, how the Prophet Muhammad understood the Quran, how he practiced Islam, the precedent, the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad. Most important source for that for a long time now has been the prophetic hadith, those hadith, right? This term Sunni is often traced by Sunnis to Sunnah, to this Sunnah. One big point of difference between Sunnis and Shias is over the hadith. I'm not going to go into all of the details about this, but I'll say a little bit about it. If we look at those hadith, those Sunni hadith as collected by Bukhari and Muslim and others, for each of these hadith, we have kind of two parts of the hadith. The body of the hadith, the matan, like the report itself, the content of the report, and we have the isnad, the chain of transmitters. So if you look at these hadith, what you will see the hadith report, the body of the report, and then you will see text telling you so-and-so narrated that so-and-so narrated that so-and-so narrated that so-and-so narrated that they saw the Prophet Muhammad say do this on a certain day, okay? And what happens in early Islam is you got a lot of reports circulating about the Prophet Muhammad, what he said, what he did, so forth and so on. And early Muslims recognize that not all these reports might be accurate, and they might not all be equally strong, they might not all be equally valid, equally binding. So how do you know which ones you should trust and which ones you should not? Well, one thing that early Muslims do is they want to look at, where did this hadith report come from? Who said that they saw the Prophet Muhammad did this? And then who said that they heard from that person, right? Where did this report come from? Where did it come from? And you get this science of hadith that tries to sift the good and the bad hadith, the strong from the weak, from the don't trust this, just put this one aside, right? You get this science of hadith that tries to sift this, to sort this out. And again, they're often looking at the sanad, the isnads, the chain of transmitters, Well, one thing you want to do is you're going to want to understand who were these different transmitters who are alleged to have heard these hadith reports. Who were they? Were they good Muslims? What was their character like? And also, could the different individuals who are, the links in these chains, could they really have met one another? Did they really meet one another? So you start putting together biographies of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad and his successors to the successors and all these individuals, and trying to, work out, who really knew whom, who was a good Muslim, so forth and so on. This, and also just how many different, attestations you have and things like this, right? This could all help you work out which hadith to trust and which one's not. Well, the Shias are going to end up saying that a lot of the Sunni hadith are compromised by the fact that they don't trust those companions who transmitted them. And there's oh man, there's just so much we could say about this. I think I'm just going to leave it there. There's a lot more we could say about this, but that's a pretty important place to start. That's a pretty important piece of it. There's a lot of differences between Sunnis and Shiis. The one big one is that they don't recognize all the same hadith. And they don't recognize all the same hadith because they don't agree on whom was really a good Muslim, a reliable Muslim in the early decades of Islam. That's going to be a big part of it. But when you hear Sunni, you get hear Sunnah, I think we can understand here this whole rich hadith tradition that you have in Sunni Islam, right? Shiis also have hadith. Their hadith typically differ from those of the Sunni. What does the word Shi mean? It means a partisan, one who is of a party. Basically, the idea here is one who is supporting somebody. Who is it that's being supported? Ali. Actually, I'll go into a little more detail on this, and then it'll be relevant for some of the later questions. What happens when the Prophet Muhammad dies in Islam? What happens when the Prophet Muhammad dies? Who ends up leading the ummah? Who ends up leading the community? Well, the person that is eventually selected and recognized by the majority of Muslims is Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr, this is also a nickname, by the way, Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr is not related to the Prophet Muhammad directly by blood. He is the father of one of the Prophet Muhammad's wives, Aisha, right? So there is a connection there, and there's some other connections as well, but he's not like a direct blood relative, but he is related by marriage. There's some other kind of connections. He's a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, right? He's one of the close companions of the Prophet Muhammad. He ends up leading the early community. He becomes the first caliph of the Muslim community, recognized by most Muslims. This is in 632. The Prophet dies in 632. Prophet Muhammad dies in 632. Then then Abu Bakr dies in 634, 2 years later. And a new caliph needs to be selected, needs to be chosen. And one is, and his name is Umar, okay? And Umar lives for 10 years, from 634 to 644. And then he dies. And now you need a new caliph. And another is selected, Uthman. And he's there from 644 to 656. And then he dies, and we get the fourth is Ali. In my face-to-face class, I'm hoping we're going to have time to go into this in some detail. For those in the net, all my sections, it's in the textbook, and I will try to make a video on this, but let me just go through a little bit of this now. It's complicated history. I'm just going to try to boil this down very quickly. When we look at these four caliphs, these four first caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, the first three of them are not directly blood related to the Prophet Muhammad. The fourth is. Ali is the Prophet Muhammad's cousin, and you may recall Prophet Muhammad, his father died before his birth, his mother died when he was 6, he went to go live with his grandfather died when he was 8, then he goes to live with his uncle Abu Talib, who is the father of Ali. So Muhammad has Ali as a cousin and actually spent some time with him growing up, right? Ali also provides the Prophet Muhammad with his only surviving male grandchildren. Very important. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, they are selected as caliph ahead of Ali. Ali finally is selected caliph as the fourth caliph, right? He dies shortly thereafter in the year 661. From the Sunni perspective, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, they're all legitimate. They all should have been selected. They were great Muslims. They are among the greatest of the companions, and they were the greatest caliphs. The period of their rule, they're called the Rashidun, the rightly guided caliphs. This is viewed as a golden age in Islam by Sunni Muslims. And we have a lot of hadith, important hadith in Sunni Islam that are narrated by one of these individuals, through one of these individuals, sourced back to one of these individuals or people that were close to them in their lives, right? From the Shia perspective, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman should never have been caliph. They should never have been caliph. It should have been Ali from day one. Actually, many Shias believe that the Prophet Muhammad appointed Ali as his successor, that the Prophet Muhammad intended Ali to serve as his successor after his death. And many would say that Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, they kind of stepped over Ali. Many Shias will say they even intentionally stepped over Ali, and they kind of stole the caliphate from him, right? And even usurpers. For Sunnis, this is often deeply hurtful. They say, absolutely not, right? This process all unfolded the way it was supposed to, guided by God. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, they weren't blood related to the Prophet like Ali was, true, but they were great Muslims. They were chief among the companions, right? And they were great caliphs. And their word is to be trusted. We will trust these hadith that are rooted in them. This can get pretty complicated, right? Pretty complicated. As you can imagine, sometimes there could be some hard feelings about this. We have this in religion and outside of religion on things, right? But what this does is give you a little bit more background in Islam, which will also show up in some of the questions we're going to deal with in a moment. It also helps us to understand the sources of these names. Shi means partisan of who? Ali. It's basically the party of Ali. You can call them the Alids. They're the people that thought that Ali should be there from day one. They're the people that thought that Ali should be there from day one, that Muhammad appointed him, that he had received the true designation, the Nas, from the Prophet Muhammad, and he should have been there from day one, right? And different types of Shias are largely distinguished by how they understand the true rulers, of the community, coming out of this line of Ali. The largest group of Shias are called the 12er Shias because they recognize 12 imams, 12 rulers starting after the Prophet Muhammad, from Ali down to the 12th. What happened to the 12th? The idea is he kind of disappeared from history, but he's still alive, and that he'll return at the end of time, at the end of days. Other groups of Shias recognize lines of imams, some even continuing to the present day. The Ismailis, their leader, the Aga Khan, continues to the present day. I think the current Aga Khan is maybe the 49th. I hope I'm right about that. At least I'm close on that. You could read about the different groups of Shias and how they understand the lineage of leaders of imams, coming out of Ali and his sons, Hassan and Hussein. Okay. So Shi means partisan of Ali, of the party of Ali. Sunni, take back the Sunnah. I always think of it, at least in this way, as being connected with this rich traditions around the Sunnah is embodied in the Hadith, like the Sunni Hadith, with everything that goes along with that, like the doctrine of the companions, affirming, that Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman were great companions. They were legitimate caliphs. There's so much we could actually say about the differences between Sunnis and Shias. I want to be a bit mindful of time. What are some things that divide them? They disagree on the qualifications of caliph, right? The caliph here is somebody who is a successor to the Prophet Muhammad, as leader of the Islamic community, and also a deputy of God. We could take the term caliph in these two senses: a successor to the Prophet Muhammad and a deputy of God on earth, right? And all early Muslims agree the community is supposed to be led by one caliph. And you do have Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, and then it gets pretty complicated after that. And at some points in history, you do get multiple caliphates even at the same time. The Ottoman Empire was a caliphate, which ended with World War I. the first major caliphate in Islamic history after these four is the Umayyads, who ruled from 661 to 750, followed by the Abbasids from that time to about 12 to the middle of the 1200s, and others include the Mughals, and there's quite a few of them, and they're all very important to learn about for history. Okay, Islamic history, world history. But yeah, so Sunnis and Shias are going to disagree about who's qualified to be caliph. They're going to disagree to some extent about the nature of the caliph. They're going to disagree about the companions who are really good companions of the Prophet Muhammad. They're going to end up with different traditions of hadith coming out of this, and they're going to have different traditions in Islamic law, different ways of reading the Quran. A lot of this is really rooted in the question of, who was it really who should have succeeded the Prophet Muhammad upon his death? A lot of it's rooted in that. Basically, all of it's rooted in that. One other thing I want to say before we move on, two things. Number one, we shouldn't assume that Sunni Islam, as we know it today, and any form of Shiism, arise already in 632 or 633 or even 661. It really takes a couple hundred years for these things to develop and crystallize fully, kind of in the way we know them today. Then again, a lot of elements of them appear quite early. Another thing I want to say is this, I think is really important. Sunnis 80 to 85% worldwide, Shias 10 to 15. There's a lot of Muslims in the world. It's like 2 billion Muslims. So 10 to 15% of that number, it's a large number of people we're talking about. However, these stats can also obscure something that I think we want to clarify, right? And many scholars would point out, we're talking about percentage of Muslims worldwide. If we look at, what is sometimes called the Islamic heartland, ranging from, historically, I'm speaking of here, right? Ranging from like Turkey to Pakistan, it's about 50% Shia. And if we look around the Persian Gulf Rim, it's about 80% Shia. And the most populous Muslim country in the world is Indonesia. It's basically all Sunni. So it is important to get those worldwide figures, but it's also interesting to, break it down regionally as well. All right, 59. I hope I got enough battery here to make it through the rest of this. Battery and memory. Which of the following branches of Islam is dominant in Iran today? D, 12 or Shiism. 60. According to classical Sunnism, what requirements must a person meet in order to be eligible to lead the Islamic community as caliph? There's actually a bit of dispute on this, but we just keep it simple. It's E. The Sunnis, by and large, said, if you want to lead the Islamic community as caliph, you got to be a Muslim, you got to be male, you do not have to be related to the Prophet Muhammad by blood, descended from Ali and Fatima. Actually, there were some Sunnis that argued that you need to be an Arab, maybe you need to come from the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad, but a lot rejected that. But the Sunnis, the one thing they did agree on, you do not have to be descended from Ali. Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman were not descended from Ali, but in Sunni Islam, they're the first three caliphs. They're rightly guided. They're among the rightly guided, right? They're among the chief of the companions. 61, according to 12er Shiism, what are the requirements? It's D, all of the above. You got to be a Muslim, you got to be a male, and you got to be descended from Ali and Fatima. D for 61. 62, who is Ali? Who is Ali? D, all of the above. I'm going to go through some of these quickly to just make sure that the phone doesn't cut on me. 63, what was the significance of the Battle of Karbala? It's C, the forces of Hussein were defeated, contributing to the rise of Shiism. You could read about that. It's in textbook. 64, according to Sunni tradition, what were the names of the first four caliphs? Okay, we already did this. It's B, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. The fifth Sunni one, by the way, the head of the Umayyads was Muawiyah, who's also regarded as a great companion in Sunni tradition. 60 is Muawiyah's son, Yazid the First, who was the leader of the Umayyads during the time of the Battle of Karbala. 65, which of the following are recognized as prophets in Islam? Ishmael, check. David, check. John the Baptist, check. D, all of the above. 66, which of the following views of Jesus does Islam endorse? Born of the Virgin Mary? Yep. Prophet and miracle worker? Yep. Son of God? Nope. What's the answer? E, only A and B. 67, true or false? Arabic Persian and Turkish are all belong to the same language family. False. There's 3 different language families here: Semitic, Indo-European, and Turkish. 68, true or false, English and Persian are both Indo-European. They are, actually. English is related to Persian. 69, Arabic and Hebrew are both Semitic languages. True. Yep. 70, where and when did the Mughals rule? Mughals were one important caliphate in Islamic history. India from 1500s to 1700s. You can actually find Mughals, I think, hanging on through parts of India and all the way through the early part of the 1800s, but really 1500s to 1700s B. Mughals are famous for a lot of reasons. They played a very, very important role in the history of India. They produced a lot of great art and poetry. Also a lot of the, current situation between Hindus and Muslims in Pakistan is often traced back to them, and there's all sorts of debates about that. Well, it's so complicated. I'm not even going to get into that. All right, 71. What is the most populous Muslim nation in the world? To eat Indonesia. We went over that. And 72. Roughly what percentage of the total population of the U.S. identifies as Muslim? I think it's only about 1%. It might be a little bit larger now, actually. I've had this question on the midterm for a while. It might be a little bit larger than that, but it ain't much larger than that. There have been people go out sometimes and poll Americans and say, what percentage of the U.S. population would you guess is Muslim? And people often say 10%, 15%, 20%. It's like 1%. Okay, that's it, my friends. About an hour, 15 minutes here. Good luck on the exam. Look up any of the questions I didn't cover in your textbook on Google. If you have any questions, send me an email. See you in the next video. Bye.